Hey there, my name is Alex. I am the Silver Mont, and I just came back from China, where I spent 2 weeks. So, I thought I'd talk about it a little, as it was quite the experience. This isn't a travel guide or anything like that, but I'll talk about my experience there, which may be useful for you. Maybe it'll be interesting. But all of this starts with the process of getting in to China, which was definitely more involved than other places I've been. Whilst I'm hardly a world traveller, I've been around, but the first step, of course, was getting a visa. Unlike other countries I'd been to, this involved filling out quite a large form online, then printing it out and taking it, along with all my documents and travel plans, to the visa centre in London. I had to make this trip 3 times. See, the first time I went, I didn't have my flight info. I didn't have any flight info. My reasoning had been that it makes more sense to acquire a visa and then buy tickets, because if you buy a ticket and then your visa is declined for whatever reason, you're done for. Turns out, though, you need your return flight info. But even if I had brought that, I still wouldn't have been able to proceed, as they needed information that I was not told about online. Specifically, I needed the hukou and the ID of the person I was staying with. That's another thing. If you're staying with someone in China, you'll need a letter of invitation, which they fill out and send to you, which is an official document. At any rate, the second time I went, I managed to have the visa, the hukou, everything I needed, but then I had to go a third time to collect my passport, because they needed to keep that the second time when I filled in the visa. There was the option of having them send the passport back in the post, which cost a little extra, not much, but I wasn't sure it would get back to me in time, and obviously I can't fly without my passport. And I was worried it might get lost in the post. So all in all, I had to spend around 6 hours in the visa centre across 3 trips. That's not including the travel time, which was about, an hour to London and an hour back. It was a lot less streamlined than other visa applications I've done, such as the one for America, where you fill out a form online in like 10 minutes, give them, $15, something like that, then you're more or less done. This one also cost quite a lot more. The whole thing felt like it was needlessly complicated. Some of that, I get some countries might take security more seriously than others. That's fine, I don't have a problem with that. But I do have a problem with how disorganized it all seemed. One example, after submitting the visa papers, let me break it down to you. So you get to the visa building, you queue up to get to reception. After you go to reception, they give you a number. You wait for your number to be called. Then you go to your little booth or whatever, and you fill out the form. Well, you've already filled out the form, but you hand it over because you couldn't hand it over at reception for some reason. Then, after doing that, you then have to go and queue up again somewhere else to pay. This could have all been done at one spot. This could have all been done in one booth. You go in, you go to a booth where they, that's where you are received. They take your papers and take your payment. There was no reason you needed to see 3 different people for effectively just handing them paper and giving them money, And for most countries, this would have been like an automated online process, probably. Either way, visa aside, then it was a 13 or so hour flight once I went to the airport. Sadly, I'm not able to sleep on planes as my body is stupid, so I watched a bunch of mostly awful movies, but the flight itself was fine. I was in whatever you call the cheapest seat. For me, in British Airways, it was called World Traveller, which is their fancy way of saying, economy, or I think some places call it coach or third class, whatever. But the flight was fine. I had plenty of legroom. I was by myself on my row, aisle, whatever. 2 meals, snacks in between. Sure, no problems there, and I got a pretty good price for the ticket as well. The only problem was it was a 13-hour flight and I couldn't sleep, so I was exhausted. As for the movies I watched, it was, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which was kind of bad. The Flash, which was weird, and like a third of the movie was just pointless. Shazam! Fury of the Gods, which was... I don't remember anything about it. Then I think I watched an episode of Joe Pickett, which was actually alright, and I've been meaning to watch that anyway. But landing in China, I was going to the Beijing Daxing Airport, which is a nice airport and it's like brand new. I think they only finished building it like a few years back. But upon landing, I then had to fill in another form similar to my visa form, which was relatively in depth, but only took about 10 minutes. But I had to say where I was staying, why I was there, all of that. Then after doing that, I had to submit some more fingerprints, which I'd already done at the visa place in London, but I guess I needed to do it here as well so they can. I don't know. But then it was through security and baggage claim. No issues with any of that. My baggage was there waiting for me. It all went relatively smoothly. There weren't big queues either, as there weren't too many people on the flight. Because when you go to an airport, when you're arriving, they usually have like internationals and locals. For example, when you're landing back in the UK, if you have a UK passport, you go through the fast track bit, whereas everyone else goes through, like the EU or international part. But there were so few people at the airport that I got to go through the fast track Chinese bit, even though clearly I'm not Chinese. I don't know much Chinese, I'll point out. In fact, I know virtually none. I can recognize a few isolated words here and there, but most of the staff at the airport could speak a little English, but a lot of them, they were pointing and talking in Chinese, so you just had to use context clues. Still, once I was done with the airport, that's not the end of security and check-in. Not all hotels in Beijing and China will take foreigners. In fact, it seems like the majority don't. This is because hotels that take foreigners need to have a registration system to scan your passport, effectively to tell the, immigration or tourist part of the government where you are, so they know where you are. I stayed in a hotel the first night in Beijing, so they take the passport and scan it quickly, no problems there. But after that, we were looking for some other hotels, and it was quite hard to find some that would, be able to take foreigners. But after that first night, I was staying with people, and first night in the hotel, no problems really. They served, complimentary breakfast or whatever in the morning, but it was a Chinese breakfast, so it was an egg that had been sort of boiled in tea, some dumplings, and like yellow rice porridge or something, which I'm used to hotels in sort of any country serving things like, toast or whatever for breakfast, so it wasn't terrible. I just, ate dumplings. But it's something to be aware of that even hotels that take foreigners, they might serve a more Chinese style of breakfast, and you might not be able to get things that you would expect from many other hotels in other countries. But yes, after that first night, I was staying with people, not in hotels. And if you're doing this, you need to inform the authorities where you are staying. In my case, I had to go to the local bureau or some description, which I've unfortunately forgotten the exact name of, but I had to get a form at this bureau, then take it to the police station to get it stamped. I wasn't staying in a large place, and they seemed a little baffled by it, as I don't think they had to do it very often. Perhaps they had never done it before, so they didn't really quite know what was going on, but they knew what to do, at least. It all went smoothly enough. Only took about 5 minutes to the police station, a little bit longer at the bureau, maybe 20 minutes, but no waiting time at least, it was all just them filing and processing the forms. But as you've probably noticed, that's quite a lot of steps, and if you're used to just going places and wandering around, this is definitely stuff you need to be aware of. Incidentally, on the way back to Beijing, when I was leaving the country, I took the coach, and they needed to check my passport at a security checkpoint on the way into Beijing. Didn't take very long, but it's something to be aware of that you will need to be stopped for a security check, the coach. And, they check everyone on the coach, but if you're a foreigner, obviously with like a foreign passport, then they need to check your passport. So make sure you leave time for things like that too. And be aware that you might be holding everyone else up on that coach as well. And in general, just keep your documents with you at all times, or a copy of them if you're traveling. I was never stopped in public or anything like that, but if you're going to be traveling around a lot, I don't know how many more of these checkpoints they might have. Presumably, going into a city, it makes sense to have a security checkpoint, but better safe than sorry to have your documentation with you. Back to the airport though. I left the airport, took the subway through Beijing, which was pretty easy. There was a lot of signage in English, and in general it was pretty easy to navigate, and the trains were on time, all running well. The only thing really to note, if you go on, say, the London Underground or whatever a lot, you're probably used to the concept of Doors open, passengers on the train disembark, and then people on the platform embark. I think that's the theory in China too, but in practice, every time those doors open, people all move at the same time, going on and off, irrespective. It isn't really a jostle, but it's approaching one. It's a little bit chaotic. But yeah, public transport with the trains at least, very easy. Brings me to my next point. You can buy almost everything with your phone in China. There's an app called WeChat, which you can load funds onto. Then you scan QR codes to pay, whether it's train, restaurant, street food, the coach, anything. However, I think it's always good to take paper money or cash when you go abroad, because you could lose or break your phone, and I would say you should do that wherever you're going, whether it's a country with almost entirely digital transactions using the phones, which is quite high tech, like what China's using. Yeah, always bring some cash. Anyway, I spent one day in Beijing, and it was cold for one thing, but different sort of cold to the UK. Same temperature, but the UK, well, it's not the most humid place in the world, but it was extremely dry in China. Like, so dry and cold that I regretted not bringing any moisturizer. Other than that, though, Beijing was, of course, different to London, but very similar too. It was London with bigger roads and a different language. It's alarming at times. Cities, no matter how many thousands of miles apart, are so similar. Globalization. I didn't spend much time in Beijing, however. Most of my time was spent in a much smaller town, though still with a population around 3 times the one of my town here in the UK. I'd say that a majority of people who saw me in this town of like 300,000 people, they stared at me. Good number of people would try and talk to me, either, just saying random English like hello, hello, or trying to engage me in Chinese, which of course was not a fruitful endeavor. It was pretty crazy to me how many e-bikes I saw, though. Dozens and dozens and dozens of them. As many as cars. Probably actually more than cars. I think an hour on the road in China, I heard more car honks and horns and toots than the rest of my life combined. People there are extremely happy to start tooting, and they have a rather lackadaisical approach to road safety from my perspective. See, I'm the sort of person who will A, find a crossing, B, wait for the lights. In China, a lot of people would just meander out into the road, weaving through cars and bikes, which was quite anxiety-inducing to watch, I tell you what. That said, I didn't see any accidents whilst I was there, fortunately. Of course, in the biggest cities I visited, Beijing and Baoding, there were more cars than e-bikes, but still a lot of e-bikes. But crossing the roads in general was no problem, as, they had countdowns, and then, green lights just so when you can go. Now and then, a driver would ignore those and just keep going, which was a little alarming, but for the most part, it was relatively easy to navigate in the big cities, as they had a good number of crossings, I would say. And if you're wondering about, how clean was Beijing and Baoding, they were pretty clean, I thought. Cleaner than London. But also, wow, people do like to spit in public in China. And honestly, I find that one of the most disgusting things imaginable. And just the sound of someone hocking up phlegm into their throat or whatever makes my skin crawl. So I didn't enjoy that, hearing that all the time. Now, the economy is pretty different over there. Food and drink was extremely cheap compared to the UK. I noticed, for example, cans of Monster Energy, less than half the price you'd pay in the UK. At one point, we got some fast food, which consisted of 2 chicken burgers, chips, and a box of fried chicken. Or if you're American, I suppose that would be 2 fried chicken sandwiches, fries, and fried chicken. But it was around £4. Obviously, it was like whatever in RMB, but converted, it would have been about £4, which is what, $5 to $6? Eating out is pretty affordable there, and there was a huge selection. Fortunately, I'm a fan of Chinese food, and I enjoyed getting to experience the authentic stuff, so to speak. Street food's plentiful too. Sausages on sticks, for example, which are Nice and crispy, but also very greasy. I also had I mean, I don't know really how to describe it. It was a yam, like like a toffee apple. It's like on a stick and stuff. It was like that, but a yam on a stick. Actually, Chinese yams were probably the highlight of my culinary experience there. I'd never had them before, but they're really nice. In one barbecue place we went to, they served up diced yams. I don't know how they were prepared other than how they had been chopped, but they were in a sort of blueberry sauce or something. It was really good. Sadly, Chinese yams are hard to get and really expensive over here. Of course, the other highlight for me were meat buns, baozi, steamed and delicious, of course. Not hard to get in the UK or to make if you have a steamer. I do not. I also tried some local pizza, some other fast food, just to, see what it was like. And yeah, it was all fine pretty much. I mean, I wouldn't say it was noticeably better or worse than it was here. Just a lot cheaper, so I guess that makes it better because it's cheaper and was about the same quality wise. On my last full day there, we went to a Korean place where I got a very nice kind of spicy udon noodle dish thing. Granted, I had to ask for a fork because I've never used chopsticks, ergo, I can't really use them. At least me trying to use chopsticks is like trying to watch someone play Dark Souls who's never played a video game before. They might be able to move around, but they're not gonna do very well in fighting. The bowls were really interesting there too. There's probably a name for it, but it was like the bottom of the bowl was extremely hot and remained hot all the time I was eating. So I had to keep sort of like moving the food around in the bowl. And if you're an expert on that sort of stuff, I'm sure you go, oh yes, that's the Korean super hot burn your tongue bowl because you didn't realize that the food on top is like, hot, warm, but the food on bottom is hotter than the sun. As for drinks, I found it a little hard to find fresh juice, like fruit juice. While it's not really a problem at restaurants, it seems most Chinese people prefer room temperature drinks, whereas I like my drinks practically ice cold. Milk and dairy products were available, but expensive, and a lot of the milk was long life milk, which again kept at room temperature, which I only like to drink milk when it's ice cold. But yeah, it was expensive though, for China. It was about the same price as the UK, butter, cheese, and so on. Yogurt was a little more popular and affordable. But how about the people? Well, they seemed nice enough. Of course, I couldn't speak Chinese, so I had to more or less stand around staring as other people did all the talking, and that'll depend on where you go to. If you go somewhere like Beijing, you'll see more foreigners and more people who are able to speak English. Workers are quite different to the UK, though. Say you go into a clothes store in the US or the UK, someone who works there might come up and say, oh, can I help you? You say, no thanks, I'm just browsing. They'll usually go back to their, own thing. In China, they will hang around, make suggestions, try getting you to wear this and that, make their suggestions, and there's bartering and haggling. More than once, we left a store only for, I assume, the owner to call out that, oh, they will lower the price after all, and we'd go back in and buy it. Generally speaking, people were polite and willing to help or accommodate. Did run into a few taxi drivers who weren't exactly polite. They were over-curious, shall we say. And if you consider people staring at you impolite, there was a lot of that too. Apparently there was a lot of, look over there, it's a foreigner, and people coming up and, asking me or asking who I was with, oh, where's he from? And I take that as curiosity and I don't really mind it. I get that in the USA too. Not if I go somewhere like LA or New York, but when I went to North Carolina and Minnesota, not generally touristy locations, as soon as people heard me speak, they would get very curious, and I got a lot of, oh, why are you here? Not like, you shouldn't be here, but like, specifically, why have you come here? People in the UK, as a general rule of thumb, are introverted and quiet in public. People in the USA are extroverted and loud. Finnish people are a lot like English people in public. They're introverted and quiet. But in summer, they kind of reverse because they're drinking as long as the sun is up. And in Finland, in the summer, the sun is still up at like 2 a.m. People in China were introverted, but loud. Somehow. I know that doesn't really seem to make sense, but it was the case. It's also worth pointing out, of course, that almost everything in China is blocked. No YouTube, no Reddit, no Twitter, no Wikipedia, and so on and so forth. Unless you use a proxy or a VPN to get around it. Their internet is very insulated from ours, and if you're the sort who likes to spend all day online, you're gonna need to well, adapt or get something like a VPN whilst you are there. Heading back home, I had no real issues at the airport. Unlike at Heathrow, where checking in bags was more or less done by yourself at a machine, at Daxing, it was more how I'm used to in the past. You queue up, you check in if you haven't already done so on your phone, you hand them your bags, and they, take them. I got there with plenty of time, even if I did have to wake up at 5 a.m, spend 2 hours on the coach, then another hour on the train. But once through security, I had plenty of time to walk around and check out the shops and the like before boarding. They had a lot of, places with discount whiskey and bourbon, and there's some pretty interesting vending machines. Like, there was a vending machine for toys, which I couldn't figure out how to use, but it wasn't a problem because I didn't really want to buy any of the toys there is. I already got souvenirs for, my family and everything, but it was a nice airport. There was a lot of interesting things to see, and it was not the biggest airport in the world, but that was nice because it meant, despite not being super busy, it was like, what? They said 6 minutes to get to, any of the gates, but it was more like a minute or 2 minutes. But I suppose they have to account for people walking extremely slowly. But it's nice. I like being able to walk around and see everything. Quite a few restaurants there. Sadly, not many of them were open by the time I got there because I think they probably opened around lunchtime. But they had stuff like global things like KFC. They had like a place that did roast duck. Sadly, wasn't open, but it looked nice. But I had no problems boarding and the like. And when I landed back in the UK, but when we were about to land, we were 200 feet above the runway. Like, we were so close, I could see it, like everything on the ground. We were 200 feet above, and then we suddenly jerked back up into the air because apparently there was something on the runway, so we had to circle, come back down again. And then I had to wait almost 2 hours to claim my baggage, which was a nightmare. As by the time I finally got back home, and I'm like an hour away from the airport, I'd been up like 30 hours. I was so tired. All in all, though, not a bad visit. I'm glad to say I've experienced it, as it's always interesting to go to other countries and see other cultures. Sadly, I didn't see too much of, the famous Chinese things, like I didn't see the Great Wall or the Forbidden City, and China is so huge that if you wanted to see everything, you'd be, flying around all over the place too. I was there mostly visiting my wife's family. I'm married now. But that about wraps it up. If you've been there, how did you find it? Or if you have any questions, feel free to ask and I'll do my best to answer. As for me, other places I want to visit in the future, now that we're allowed to fly again? Maybe a little closer to home next time. I want to visit Switzerland, Italy, and Poland. Those are the 3 I want to go to right now. Well, not at this very moment, but in the near future. I'd like to visit Japan too, for that matter. But you guys take care, thanks for watching, and have a very pleasant Christmas.